December 14th. It's approximately 1:36. This is a meeting of the Wasatch Front Economic Development District Committee. We appreciate those in attendance, and everybody's going to be safe, hopefully, because we're Zooming. I think it was a wise idea that we gave the option, or not the option, made this basically a virtual meeting rather than a drive meeting. So I think in retrospect, that was a good decision, but we're thankful for this recent snow we've had, and we can hope that it keeps coming. So Rosie, I'm going to turn the time over to you. We're going to go ahead and introduce the members and then go from there on to our agenda items. Rosie, I'll go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. So just going down the list, we have Andrea Pearson, Commissioner Gage for Amy Edwards, Alexander Hall, Andrew Gruber, Blaine Thackrell, Brandon Wood, Byron Head, Chris Roybal, Chris Sloan, Christopher Williams, C. Oliver, Edward Bennett, Eric Gibson, Ginger Chin, Holland Wilbanks, Jared Stewart, Jason Godfrey, Jeremy Shinoda, Laura Hanson, Marcia White, Mark Nold, Mayor Debbie Nguyen, Mayor Gale, Megan Townsend, Mike Sobchak, Miranda Jones-Cox, Mitzi Miranda, Monet Roberts, Muriel Sochimil, Neil Barubi, Phil Dean, Rachel Custer, Rick Boyon. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I think I do this every time. Ryan England, Shannon Ellsworth, Tammy Moody, Ted Knowlton, and that is all I see on the participants list. If you came in after the roll call, please drop your name in the chat. Thank you. Back to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Rosie, for that. With the introduction, we'll move on to our action item. The first action item this afternoon is to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was September 15th, 2022. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Got a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
We got a second. No discussion on that. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Let's go on to the chair's report. So as you probably realize, this is the last district committee meeting of the year, 2022. And there might be some new faces coming in 2023. So I just wanted to thank all those people that served on this last year, the 2022 district committee. We really did have a great year. I think we made some good progress working with the governor's office and the municipalities, the counties, the cities. Everybody shared some great ideas as we move through this year. I think it gives us a great foundation as we move into 2023 and really have some good agenda items prepared for that. I wanted to give a special thanks to Andrew. He's the one that kind of coordinates all this, and Marcia White for her work on this committee. She's the one that directs traffic for all of us and makes sure that we're all heading the right direction. So as we move into 2023, be prepared for some large agenda items, meetings. As my work on the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity Commission, you'll probably see some legislation come out that come through that you'll want to at least have some understanding of, input. Our mayors and commissioners will want to be actively involved as we move through the legislative session coming up in January. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for public comment. Do we have any members of the public online today that would like to make a comment?
Commissioner, I don't think I fall into that boat for the purposes of this meeting, but can I just build on briefly on what you just said? First, I just want to say thanks to you for chairing this EDD over the past year. I'm glad you mentioned Marcia, because it's Marcia with Rosie and others help at WFRC that are the ones that coordinate all of this work. So thanks to Marcia and to Rosie and to our team. Just looking ahead, Commissioner Forrest said there might be some new faces. Just for all of you, the way that WFRC and our committees do appointments is that we go in January of each year, mainly through the COGs, the councils of government in each of the counties in our area, and they make appointments or recommendations for appointments to various committees, including to this Economic Development District. I will tell you that the presumption we operate under is that if people are serving, if you are serving on a committee and you're still interested, you're still in office or your position, that you would continue to serve. If any of you feel like, this has been great, but it's not working for my schedule or otherwise, please let Marcia or Rosie or me know, and we can, plan accordingly. And then also for any of you, if there are other people in our community that you think would be great partners in this work and participants in this committee, then that's something that we welcome your sharing as well. It's not up to us as the staff to make those appointments, but we facilitate that process. And I'll just say again, to echo what you said, Commissioner Flohr, thanks to everybody for your partnership and coming together across our whole region for the future. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And before I move on, I want to make sure that I recognize our Vice Chair, Debbie Wynn, Mayor Wynn. She's done an excellent job making sure that I stayed on track as well. And I'm hopeful she'll be on this for the next number of years. And it really works out to be a good EDD committee with viewpoints of the cities and commissions, the counties. We sometimes have differing views, but it's great to hear from both sides and understand the issues that the cities face and also the counties face. So that's how we make progress in this state. With that, let's go to our next agenda item, which is about the Utah economy conditions outlook and intelligence. And I notice we have online with us Phil Dean, who's with the Kim Gardner Institute. Phil is the chief economist and public finance senior research fellow at the Gardner Institute. His most recent assignment before that was serving for Governor Herbert as executive director of the Governor's Office of Management Budget. But even before that, I had the opportunity to work with Phil at the legislature, and he kept track of the dollars, kept track of our committee work. And I can say from personal experience, for the 12 years I was there, I don't know how long he was there, but he did a great job making sure that the information that the committee chairs received was accurate and informative for the committee as well. Phil, with that, if you're here, I'm going to turn the time over to you. You're going to talk about the outlook and conditions for the Utah economy.
Yep. Appreciate that. And if I slip up and call you representative, just know that
That's happened before.
But well, it's good to see you again. It's good to be with you all. I'm going to make sure I can get my presentation. Is that showing for everyone?
Yes.
It is.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share some information that we presented at what we call a master class that we do in conjunction with the Salt Lake Chamber, that Marcia and Miranda were able to attend. So it might be kind of a repeat and boring for them, but hopefully it's informative. And going to talk about the Utah economy through a couple different lenses. One, I want to talk about just the general background and fundamentals of the Utah economy. And then if we have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about current economic conditions and what's going on. And in those conditions, I think it's important to remember we're in this period of economic resorting. We're in an interesting time in history. We have these structural or long-term economic changes taking place. And we also have the short-term cyclical things that are more related to the pandemic that presumably will go away over time as we return somewhat to normal. But these structural changes tell us we're not returning completely to normal. And we'll touch on some of those. And bottom line for me in all of this is it's really important to be very resilient in your systems, build in redundancy, build in resiliency, in different ways. So I'm going to start just kind of really high level about, for me, at least as an economist, how I think about the economy. And I have 6 hopefully useful insights in thinking about that. One, I'm going to touch on demographics. Demographics is destiny and it's our possibility. We have some interesting changes taking place in the state of Utah that are going to impact our economic trajectory that I think we need to pay a lot of attention to. Second is that by and large, markets are the best way to organize most economic activity, that they tend to create the most efficient outcomes. But there are times when markets fail. And when markets fail, government, at least theoretically, can help improve market outcomes. Now, government still has to execute, government still has to deliver to actually deliver those improved market outcomes. But at least from a theoretical standpoint, government can improve market outcomes when markets fail. The fourth point I'm going to touch on is that economies function like an ecosystem. Every action has a reaction, and it's really important to look comprehensively. To borrow some terminology from my friend Chris Cox, you need to take a systems level view, and it's really easy to get caught up in local optimization, but you need to think broadly. What are the downstream effects from different decisions that take place in the economy? The fifth is going to be that economies don't align with political boundaries. And this is an interesting thing sometimes when working in the political arena, but economies are much more nebulous, much more free-flowing than political boundaries are. And then finally, understanding all of this information, there's a lot of judgment, a lot of interpretation that takes place, and it's important to take time to understand those types of things. So I'm going to start with like my Econ 110 explanation of an economy, that you have different actors. We'll focus first in the middle there, households and firms. And households and firms engage in different ways. They buy things from each other. I'm going to focus a bit here about factors of production, which for simplicity we call land, labor, and capital. But you can think of land broadly as natural resources. Labor, I think that's pretty self-evident. And then capital, this is the tools that we use to create things. So it could be equipment, it could be buildings, those types of things. So how does an economy grow? We think we want economic growth because it's going to lead to higher quality of life. But how does that actually happen? So you start with a lower value input, just like a natural resource, a raw material, right? And to that, you add these factors of production. So it talks about factor accumulation there. And that's one way that you can grow your economy. You just get more workers, you have more equipment, you have more ability there to produce goods and services. The public sector does some of this, and the private sector does some of this. So you think about the public sector, an issue that you're very involved in, dealing with transportation, dealing with water, dealing with education on the labor side there. Sometimes we separate these things, but they're very interrelated, the work that government does with what happens in the economy. And then it's a related issue, and sometimes it's hard to like parse out exactly which goes in which bucket. But when you think about productivity, then productivity is what improves these things. We figure out better ways to use the land, labor, and capital, or natural resources, labor, and capital. And in the end, that ends up with higher value output. And that's what creates economic growth. So these are some issues to think about, right? Like because there are trade-offs associated with these. If we put money into corporate recruitment, a corporate recruitment incentive, that means we don't have that money available then for schools to improve labor, or we don't have that money to build roads, to get goods here and there. So there are trade-offs associated with these that I think are really important to think about. And one of the other important trade-offs to think about is the distribution of these economic resources. As you make those different policy decisions about how you're going to allocate those resources in the public sector, this impacts who ends up benefiting or getting harmed. And so it's important to think through those, right? Who captures that value? How does that get distributed? So this is essentially another visual, just kind of getting at the same thing, right? That you have all of these linkages in an economy. So here in Utah, we have linkages out of state, linkages within state. And as you think about what happens in an economy, for example, maybe you want to incent a new job to come in for a firm. That job might be a net new job, or it might just displace an employee that's already here, given our very, very tight labor markets. So you may not actually be creating any new growth in the economy. You may just be shifting that around in that distribution of resources. So another thing, and just looking at the membership of this committee, I think it kind of recognizes this, but like I mentioned, economies don't follow political boundaries. And this is how we think about how the Utah economy functions. And with all of these, you have out-of-state linkages as well. But we kind of group the state into economic regions, and this was prior to my time here, but I was involved in my prior role in some of these discussions, very much related to commuter sheds, that how economies function kind of on how you can easily interact. And so you look, we group the greater Salt Lake area essentially from Juab County all the way up, including Logan, as an economic region, because there's clear evidence of very significant interactions there. And you may say, well, yeah, Cache County doesn't interact that much with Utah County. First of all, I think there's more than you expect there might be. But second of all, there are very significant interrelationships between Weber County, particularly, and Cache County and Box Elder County. And again, even though we have these organized with political boundaries drawn, you think about the Logan area, that goes into Idaho. Just again, remember, economies don't neatly follow political boundaries. And then looking at the Uinta Basin, that kind of operates as a regional economy. So I'm not going to go through them all, but I just want to emphasize this point. As you're thinking about an economy, remember that economies don't follow political boundaries. Now we're going to talk a little bit about different market failures or government failures. So this is kind of one of the classical examples, actually, that's a pretty prominent national example that's used nationally about some of these issues that I've been raising. So you look at Geneva Steel, and it created these jobs, it created these benefits, but there were also costs associated with that. And this is like one of those natural experiments that occurred, that you had Geneva Steel that was operating, and then it shut down for a while, and then it reopened again. And this gave a really good opportunity to analyze what happened in these externalities, we call them, out there, where it created air quality issues when they operated. And then that in turn created hospital admissions. And this is tracking children's hospital admissions during that time period. And very clear relationship where the full costs of Geneva Steel operating were not borne by those in that private company, but they were spread more broadly throughout society. Here's another example that I find pretty interesting. I do hear people ask a lot about water and how much is water a constraint to our economic growth. And to me, it's certainly something we need to be paying a lot of attention to. But then I also look at data like this and I say, well, I think there's probably opportunity for more efficient water use. Now, this is a couple of years old, so hopefully data would look different if we were doing this today, but this just compares given turf grass, like not changing landscapes, just given turf grass shown in the gray, how much do people actually water if their water is metered? And if their water is unmetered, how much do they actually water? Right, and very significantly more than what plants actually need. And multiple studies in different ways have shown similar information. Again, hopefully we're doing better than this now, but these are the types of things that are kind of interesting. One, that people do better with good information. They make better economic decisions when they have good information. And then the other piece to start thinking about, and that I think a lot about as an economist, is price. Price is an important aspect. And so you think about metering, that often that's tied then to some cost that comes out of pocket when people use water. Then the last piece I want to follow up with is just looking at housing that has both private sector and public sector impacts. So this just shows the growth in the number of households. I'm sure you've all seen this graph before, right? The red showing number of new households created since the Great Recession and number of new housing units built. A couple of things stand out to me. One, when allowed, the market is and can be quite responsive in terms of constructing more more housing, excuse me. And at the same time, there are government constraints to the market fully functioning. And there may be reasons for that, but I think is an important thing to think about. We have this tension that we feel. And by the way, the benefits of that and the costs of that are not equally distributed through society. And I have it in the slides. If we have time, we'll get to it later. I'll touch on that. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I want to talk about the economic history of Utah. That when the state was settled, you can think of this as the Great Basin Kingdom, kind of survival mode early on. And then Utah became a colony of Wall Street. You had mining booms, you had outside capital that came into the state. You kind of had these big companies that had a lot of the employment in the state. Then over time, we became a colony of Washington, D.C. Many of the New Deal programs, you think Geneva Steel, that was actually what drove Geneva Steel in the first place. Different national defense contracts, things like that. And then it's kind of in the 80s where we have this transition to the modern economy. And it's a pretty remarkable transition where you look at it. So one element of that is both in Utah and throughout the US, we're much more a service producing economy than we used to be. By the way, this has some impacts on budgets because of sales taxes, an important thing to pay attention to. But this shows the differences between 1970 and 2020. So a 50-year time span. Look at how much the Utah economy changed in terms of its composition. On the left, a lot more mining, a lot more government. And then on the right, in today's economy, we quite closely mirror the US economy in terms of our industrial composition, right? How much in each sector of the economy. And you've probably seen this graph before, but this is the data that underlies that, right? So the Hochman Index essentially has a mathematical measurement for all of those pieces. And so back in 1970, we were very much not the diverse economy that we are today, where we have one of the most diverse economies in the US. So I'm not going to spend time on this, but as I look at the Utah economy, we have many opportunities, which also represent our challenges. They're just two sides of the same coin. Continuing growth is with us. Touch on that some more. Structural changes taking place in the economy. We'll touch on that. And then we do have people that are being left behind. Some people have done the best they've ever done in the history of their business over the last couple of years. But that's definitely not true for everyone. So this is one example of some of those that are being left behind. So this is looking at the different K-12 education outcomes for students who are economically disadvantaged compared to those who are not economically disadvantaged. You start seeing these patterns develop very early in grade school and persist throughout education. And then, by the way, persist then into labor market outcomes and incomes down the road. But this is a massive untapped human capital potential that we have out there. This is the one I was referring to before. I will take a minute on it here. Just looking at home ownership, which is, by the way, how most households build most of their wealth, is through owning housing. Now, some of this is related to demographics, that older people tend to own homes more, and we have a more white, older population, more racially and ethnically diverse, younger population. But I think this should give us maybe some pause as we kind of think of about what's going on in housing markets and who's able to access housing markets in terms of home ownership and who's not. So one of the things that we do is talk about some Utah myths in this masterclass, as mentioned before. Talk about some myths about the Utah economy. We actually have a number of more, so I selected a few for today's presentation. But this is one I hear quite a bit. The ag makes up 20% of the Utah economy. I think when you see studies like that, they're pulling in like groceries, they're pulling in restaurant sales, which in my mind really isn't ag. That's kind of a different thing. Agriculture's under 1%, 0.5% of the Utah economy. And even more interesting to me is that our ag industry as a share of the Utah economy is half of the nation as a whole. That surprises people sometimes. Sorry, skipped over that one. So another myth out there is Utah is a low wage, low income state. So this is, these measures tend to be very sensitive to the actual measure that you're using. So if you look at per capita incomes, for example, we are on the low end. That's because we have all these little capitas in cribs and in school, right, that aren't earning income, right? So that kind of makes sense. We also have larger household sizes and some of the largest household incomes. So we're top 10 in terms of household incomes in the state. But this is, I think, probably a more representative measure, just looking at median annual incomes for full-time year-round workers. So we do have a lot of part-time workers, especially among females, that pulls that like total number down. But when you look at what I think is a more accurate basis of comparison, we're basically toward the middle. In this particular measure, a little bit above the middle, but pretty close to the middle of wages compared to the US. And again, this is not adjusting for age structure. If we did that, we'd actually be even more on the high end. Another myth, Utah's a rural state. Utah, even though we have a lot of kind of empty space out there, we're a very urban state with urban issues. Another one that we're a small population state. Now, certainly we're not like California or Texas or New York, but we're very much a mid-size state now. And as you look at us continuing to grow, we're going to become more of a mid-sized state as we grow faster. So right now our population rank is 30th in the US. That's very much in the middle rather than being a small state. So in the last 10 minutes or so that I have, I'm just going to talk about current economic conditions and what's going on. And again, I'm going to go back to demographics. As I think about the Utah economy, our population growth rate, as we all know, led the nation in between the 2010 and 2020 census. You look at the prior year, we were right up there at the top again with Idaho that did grow faster than us. But a couple of things that I think are important takeaways from this, and much economic data that you look at is going to track this. We're at the heart of the Intermountain West, and that's one of the fastest growing regions in the US. And you look where else is growth taking place, population growth taking place in the South. And almost you track jobs data, you track population data, almost any type of economic data tends to track this. The fast growing areas of the nation are Intermountain West. And again, we're right at the heart of that here in Utah and in the South. So this is, I think, an important one to pay a lot of attention to. So this graph shows the total change in Utah population. So the total change is the black line there at the top, and population change in the state is made up of natural increases. So new births in the state minus deaths in the state gives you that net number of natural increase. And you see, we kind of had this peak in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, that time period. And then it's been declining. And part of that is part of these waves that go through the population from baby boomers. So as baby boomers and then their kids, you start seeing these waves that show up. And so that's part of what's going on there. Another piece that's going on is we have a declining fertility rate. And so we're below replacement level, which I never thought in my entire career I would say that, but we're below replacement level, meaning over the long term, if we didn't have immigration, our population would shrink. This is kind of a unique thing for Utah to be in this situation because it's not been our past, but it is our present. And then the last piece I want to touch on here, net migration. That's the gray bars at the bottom. And, you know, we used to always say, you compare that natural increase to the net migration, and it's all, yes, we're growing, but all the growth is our internal population growth. That's no longer the story. That used to be the story, and it used to be an accurate story, but that's no longer what's taking place. As you look at the growth that's taking place now, for the last several years, the majority of the growth has been from in-migration, not from natural increase. And that's, again, I think that's a really important inflection point that elected officials need to pay attention to, that those of us that think about the Utah economy need to pay attention to. Essentially, we do have a lot of economic migrants coming into the state, but there's pushback to that. People feel the impact of that and have a lot of questions about it.
Phil, can I just interject right there before you leave that point? I heard a statistic that of in-migration, Utah has by far the highest number of migrants moving in from other states that are returning Utahns, far more than any other state in the country. So, you know, our kids move away and they're gone for a while and then they come back to Utah. Is that accurate?
So I'm going to check with our demography team, but I think I have heard that. So let me circle back like with more specific information, but I do think we have a lot of this, these ties. So it's not just random people coming here, it's people that already have ties to the state in many cases that are coming back to the state. And I'll shoot you an email later with more detail on that. But again, like I'm spending a little bit more time on this slide, but I think it's a critical thing to understand that our growth is not anymore just our internal population growth. And it's never been only that, I guess, but it's like the majority of our growth now is this net migration. So here's another one in terms of challenges that we face, and I also think tremendous opportunities. You look at the pain of poverty, and that pain is not equally distributed here throughout our society. And this is, I think, one of the things for me that's a bright light to think about is you see very strong relationships between education and skill levels and economic outcomes, and it should make sense, right? The more you're able, the greater ability you have to produce goods and services, the more ability you have to fend for yourself economically, to take care of yourself economically. And it's the one thing I wish this data and graph had is technical training. We're increasingly seeing gaps there that need to be filled that can create very high paying jobs in the economy. But the bottom line is increased skill development improves economic outcomes, clear relationship there. So this is one of those graphs that I always tell when I teach students how to present information, I say, never do a graph like this. But the point of this graph is not figuring out what every line is, but just what's happened over the last couple of years. So these are all the components of GDP. When we break down the components of GDP, you have goods consumption by household, services consumption by households, business investment, exports, imports, government in there. And before the pandemic, yes, you saw the occasional difference there, but by and large, everything in the economy was kind of moving consistently in the 3 years leading up to the pandemic. And then you see what happened during the pandemic, where everything went skewampus. We had all these drops except for government. And then you see the recovery pretty early on in 2020, or at least the beginnings of the recovery. But things have not normalized. And that's the point of this graph, is you still have these massive fluctuations taking place. This is what's creating these pockets of strength, or at least reflects the pockets of strength and weakness out there in the economy. This surprises people when I present this information. Got a lot of news coverage. The first 2 quarters of 2022 had negative GDP growth. Interestingly, though, in that time, household consumption increased. So on an inflation-adjusted basis, household consumption increased in the US. But what did happen is that it changed. The nature of that changed, that we saw these larger increases in services that were offset by declines in goods that were still net positive. So if you're in the goods producing sector, you might think, I had, a couple of the best years ever as you look at some of those gray bars there. And now like the sky's falling. Really what's happening is we're going back to somewhat more normal economic functioning. The services are now broadly open. We're back to more normal functioning in society. So this is, if you don't track this, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta does what they call a nowcast, looking at the US economy. I find this interesting. We'll see where it ends up. Certainly there are concerns emerging along with good signs with moderating inflation. But right now, through the data publicly released so far, GDP is on track to be above all of the blue chip Wall Street estimates, every single one of them. As of now, data that's currently out there have under forecasts what's actually happening. There's a lot going on that's positive in the economy that sometimes doesn't get the headlines. That being said, there are massive risks out there as well to the economy, and I don't want to discount those. But I'm going to talk about a couple strength signals, a couple warning signals, corporate profits at all-time highs as a share of GDP. So this isn't an inflation issue. All that's kind of baked in. All-time highs in corporate profits. A warning signal, consumer sentiment. People are grumpier now than they were in March and April of 2020. And let that sink in for a minute. People are more pessimistic now than back then. The sting of high inflation is real. This is the single greatest economic risk, and the responses to this with interest rate increases, single greatest economic risk that's out there. Thankfully, it moderated, that we're down, so it's not reflected in this graph, but it moderated to 7.1. That's the good news. The bad news is here in the mountain region, we're still at 8.3% overall. So with our hot economy, we're tracking inflation higher here than in the rest of the US. I'll skip those in the interest of time. But this is the bottom line. To get inflation under control, interest rates have to go up. And they are going up. And I haven't checked the news, but I'm assuming they're going up again today. This just compares a 30-year mortgage rate, which is a long-term rate in the green. The blue is federal funds rate. So that's a short-term overnight loans between banks, super short-term, and then inflation. And these rates are still below inflation. This is not normal. I used to do mortgage loans, and I always thought somewhere in the 6 to 7%, kind of where we're at, was a neutral mortgage rate. It's I'll just say it this way, a 2.5% mortgage interest rate is not normal. That's the abnormality. Where rates are right now is much more normal. So why do interest rates matter? They influence things that we purchase over time, right? So homes and cars are the big ones for household. Businesses, equipment and facilities are financed. And when you increase interest rates, you make all of that more expensive. So this is, as I wrap up here, this is, I think, a really big piece to understand. And it creates, to me, some of the greatest uncertainty about what we're seeing out there in the economy. Federal government with fiscal policy had a massive intervention, unlike anything ever seen before, this quickly. So this was all within a single year. All of that was enacted, especially that wave 3. The ARPA funds are hitting the economy now, and some of them did hit very early, but some are still going out. But what did people do with that money? They saved a massive share of it. Okay, we're back to more normal levels, but what we still have is massive amounts of money sitting in bank accounts. Now, this is an aggregate total, so it's not true for everyone, but in terms of money sitting in people's bank accounts, not businesses, people's bank accounts, household business accounts, household checking accounts, they were about $1 trillion. 1.25 trillion for the US economy. They're now up above $5 trillion, and they keep increasing. So this is through the third quarter. I keep expecting some moderation or that to start coming down a little bit with inflation. It's not. People are still sitting on a lot of money in aggregate. Household debt service levels at multi-generational lows. People refinanced and paid off debt. You look at who holds the mortgage debt? I hear a lot about concern about, is this going to be another great recession because we're going to have these widespread defaults? Certainly, there are always risks out there, but borrowers with 760 plus FICO scores hold 70% of the mortgage debt. This is not the same situations of the Great Recession. That being said, we are seeing upticks in delinquency rates. And especially, I'll highlight among those with the lowest incomes, that inflation very much is impacting all households, but especially lower income households. And that's where we're starting to see very significant impacts. So I'll wrap up here talking a little bit about labor markets. Mark Nold, I saw, is on the call. He could tell you a lot more about this than I can. But we're dealing with a couple things. Real wages have declined. This is why people are so grumpy. Wages have gone up. And if you look at nominal numbers, there's actually pretty solid growth, but then you adjust out inflation and we're seeing declines in real wages. This is why people are unhappy. I'm always wanting to share a supply and demand graph whenever I can. But this just kind of points out we're not at the equilibrium. If we have shortages out there, in my mind, prices in this market, meaning wages, probably need to go up. Unemployment very low, starting to see some softening in labor markets for sure, but still pretty tight labor markets. And this is, I think, one of the important takeaways to think about. And there are a bunch of different data points you can use, but baby boomers accelerated retirements, or maybe they had been holding off and the pandemic is what put them over the edge. And that's what's driving so much of what's happening in labor markets. Sometimes people think, oh, like we'll just work through this pandemic stuff and it's going to go back to being normal. And I don't think that's happening. People sometimes forget this, but what was kind of the big constraints to economic growth in 2018 and 2019, it was not enough labor. This is a permanent shift, and I think people need to start reorienting their thinking. In my mind, the days of cheap, readily available labor are done with. This is a permanent change, and people need to orient themselves to the new change. And so just as I conclude here, to me, I always like forecasting, and my forecasts, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. To me, I think the most important thing to think about is how can you design systems that are resilient, that they can respond quickly if the economy does better than people are thinking, that you haven't made these commitments that it takes you 3 years to dig out of a hole. I think of so many businesses, how much more money they could have made if they'd had supplies in stock over the last couple of years, and both in our public entities, in our businesses, in our households. I just think it's very important to think about buffers and being able to respond quickly rather than spending too much effort trying to perfectly predict what's going to happen in the future. So that concludes what I had to share, and appreciate the chance to be with you.
Phil, thank you. Great job. Great information. I think Rosie will make sure that we get those out to the members of this committee that would like to, or if you want to send a chat to Rosie, make sure we get it. Phil, I think we got just a couple of minutes for questions. Does anybody have a question for Phil? That was a lot of information, good information. Now would be the time to do that. Well, Phil, I'm going to ask you one question myself then. So, we deal with housing situations, i.e. affordable housing. What's your forecast in terms of economic growth, economic development for our cities and counties across this state, dealing with affordable housing, which in some areas, obviously affordable housing becomes more critical in the Wasatch Front areas, maybe than some areas in eastern or central Utah. Have you got an opinion on that?
Yeah, so this is one of those challenges, and it's maybe I'll just say it this way. In my own personal view, I think government's too much constraining housing supply. In my view, what we're dealing with, certainly you had low interest rates that propelled demand, like kind of created excess demand. But even with these higher interest rates, there's still fundamentally strong demand that's there. it just kind of makes it harder for people to qualify for mortgages at those higher interest rates. I understand the reasons behind that. I understand the quality of life concerns, but to me, that's a fundamental issue we have to solve as a state is how do we get the right balance of quality of life and affordability? And to me, we're too skewed to zoning housing out that probably should be there in some way. Now you have to be smart about how you do that, right? You have to be smart about how you do the zoning. Part of what we deal with are transportation challenges, right? Like, why do people have all this pushback against growth? It's because they deal with the negative effects of it that haven't been fully taken care of. So it's, infrastructure is certainly a big piece of that, but it's also going up, to the canyons and it's overrun. It feels like Disneyland, right? When you're there, because so many people. Anyway, bottom line for me, we have to continue to increase the supply of housing. We've made, I think, good progress over the last couple of years. But I'm personally convinced the market wants to provide affordable housing. I think you're probably always going to have to subsidize those at the very low end in one way or another, whatever mechanism that is. But I also think the market, we learned this during the pandemic. I think we should have known it beforehand. People are ingenious. Like if you give them parameters to work within, they'll come up with solutions you would have never thought of. But I think sometimes government sets those parameters too hard, and you end up missing out on a lot of opportunities that would maybe be there.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's what I see. I think Laura Hanson, as she comes up later on our agenda, we'll talk about economic growth. And as you probably know, there's a number of bills coming forward out of the legislature this year dealing with exactly that, affordable housing and how we get our first timers and basically any future home buyers in the market. So Phil,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Can I just follow up with one other comment, or do you need to move on?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just I want to respond to that because I think it's something that's maybe not fully understood. And it's, I'm going to say something somewhat controversial here, but we actually don't have an overall affordability problem in the state of Utah. 70% of us own homes and we like high home prices. We don't want low home prices. We want high home prices. It builds wealth. It creates this benefit. What we do have is, and let me just take one other step back. You look at, often 30% of income is kind of viewed as a cutoff for kind of affordable, unaffordable. Over 70% of Utahns are below that 30% threshold. To me, it's pretty clear that for most Utahns, housing is quite affordable, and that's part of the problem because it's very, very, very not affordable for the other 30%. That's where, so you tend to have younger people there, and those at the lower end of the economic spectrum that are there. That's where the real crux of the problem is. And somehow we have to figure out how to reconcile continuing to maintain home values for people, for all the benefits that provides and quality of life, all of that, but also somehow figure out how to appropriately provide housing for everyone in the state, not just for the 70% that it really benefits right now.
Yeah, great point. Phil, thanks again. Great seeing you. We'll see you down at the Capitol probably before too long. So thank you very much. Let's
Sounds
move
good.
now
Thank you.
to our next agenda item. We're going to have a discussion from Ken Anderson, Chanel Flores about the West Davis Corridor Study. West Davis Corridor Study, as you may remember, was funded by the Transportation Land Use Connection Program. It was a collaboration with several cities that worked with Davis County. Ken Anderson, who is the Community and Economic Development Director of Davis County, along with Chanel Flores, will talk to us about and really present the outcomes of that corridor study. And I can say from the Weber County perspective, we're very interested in hearing this because we're hoping in the next number of years, we see an extension of that Davis corridor into the West Weber corridor. Kent, Chanel, I'll turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Commissioner and Wasatch Front and everyone here today. It's good to be with you virtually. I was looking forward to an in-person opportunity, but I think we'll take the snow. And
Exactly.
Commissioner Froer, you're spot on. I think exactly what we're doing here is what I'm hopeful that other communities can take and use as a tool maybe in the future as they have transportation opportunities. You're fine. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a presentation that I put together. Get it here. Does that seem like that comes up there?
Looks good, Kent.
All
Yeah.
right, perfect.
Good.
So I want to have first a little bit of conversation about growth. I think just about everybody in this call has been having a lot of conversations about growth, and Davis County is no different. And we've got a unique opportunity as a lot of this growth opportunity correlates with where the West Davis corridor is currently under construction. Click on here. If you look at Davis County, you know, every community is a little bit unique. We've got 15 incorporated cities, but what makes us, I think, a little bit more unique is we are the smallest county by land area, but the largest or the third largest by population. So we've got some natural constraints that are starting to come forward with the county as it relates to opportunities for land use. I looked at as part of these conversations of, well, you know, they say we're rapidly approaching being fully developed. Where are we at? 82% approximately of the Davis County developable land has been developed. And interesting enough, when you look at that, 85% of that developed land is residential. From an economic perspective, from a diversity perspective, that does provide some concerns for me. Certainly from a revenue perspective, we heard just a second ago importance of sales tax, but you know, a lot of those residential units are receiving a 45% property tax reduction. And so there's you know, already some constraints when it comes to revenue sources for our cities and our counties. Now, I love it that Phil is on the call. Kemsey Gardner puts together some really terrific information for us. And so I'm going to go through a couple more Kemsey Gardner slides. This is what Mallory Bateman had put together for us. And this shows the growth of population in Davis County, particularly looking at over the last 3 decades. You can see some pretty consistent growth each decade, and you're looking at about 175,000 increase over the last 30 years. And if you looked at back in the 80s, 90s, Davis County was primarily an agricultural community, but that has changed rapidly, so much now that you just look for open land in the communities that you see as being farming, you know, it won't be long until that has some development pressure that comes to it. This is a similar chart that Phil shared about population projection growth. So the black is the annual change. This red is this natural increase, and the gray is the net migration. You can see by about 2030, it's about even. And by 2040, Davis County is going to see more net migration than natural increase within the county. Now, this is estimating a population by 2060 of 580,000. Wasatch Front shows a population of about 520,000. That's representing either 135,000 increase or 195. Now, the last 30 years, we've brought in 175,000 residents. Can we do that again for the next 30 years? I think for that to occur, there's going to be a lot of significant redevelopment opportunities, but also some strong conversations about density on that remaining vacant land. You know, something that noted again from Phil's conversation about demographics is density. Or is destiny. That net migration is certainly going to provide that to the forefront for Davis County, and will provide some interesting policy considerations as we move forward. If you look at our population pyramids there on the left-hand side, 2020, and then 2040 and 2060, the gray are male and the red is female. Right now in Davis County, 35% of the population is under 19, 122,000. I say this comment frequently, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but again, where we used to raise crops, now we are raising kids. And this is, again, going to create some very interesting challenges over the next years, because if you talk about housing affordability, often I hear, well, I want my kids to be able to live near me. Well, with 122,000 under 19, that's going to be a challenge. And so certainly things that need to be considered as we look forward. Now we're going to look at a map of Davis County. The Great Salt Lake, I'm glad we put that in a shaded blue because that is representing maybe where water should be. I hope that's not going to create new development opportunities for us in the future and that fills up rapidly. The pink areas are the unincorporated portions of Davis County. A lot of that is going to continue to remain unincorporated. A lot of that is nature conservancy, wetlands. And so you're already looking at, in Davis County right now, our unincorporated population is less than 1% of our total population. So a lot of the growth is going to occur within existing communities. And so we said, let's put together a chart showing how much acreage is left to be developed and where are those areas. So most of it is going to be in the northwest part of the community. West Point leads the way, Layton, and Syracuse. These will be the areas where there's some opportunities. And if you look at just totaling, we've got about 12,000 undeveloped acres. That's likely aggressive. It's probably less than that. When I presented this to some of the cities, they say, no, we've actually got less than that. So we may even be talking more like 10,000 acres of developable land. Now, as you look in this location, those that aren't familiar with this area, this is exactly where the West Davis corridor is currently under construction. And so there's West Point, Syracuse, Layton. Right now, it's going to terminate approximately right here at State Route 193. It's a 14-mile, 4-lane freeway, estimated to be open in 2024. Going from Farmington again up to that State Route 193, 6 interchanges, 12 miles of trails. I love to see the aggressiveness from UDOT and the governor about trails and the importance of those. Now, is what's unique about a West Davis corridor, it's not very often you get a new freeway built in your community. And so we recognize the opportunity to partner, and thanks again to Wasatch Front Regional Council for providing a TLC grant so that Davis County could lead out with West Point, Syracuse, Layton, Kaysville, and Farmington to conduct a corridor interchange market study. I think it's important for me to say that this is a market study. This doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what's going to hit the ground or that, you know, over a market period, things can change. But as what we wanted was a tool for our cities to use when they are making land use decisions and try to make the best decisions for their communities as it relates to these interchanges. For the context of the conversation today, the 4 interchanges that I'm going to talk about are SR 193, Antelope Drive, 2700 West in Layton, and then the Shepherd Lane 950 North. This is important because of the work that's going on down in Farmington. Right here, the 950 North, there's not a lot of development opportunity, but the new Shepherd Lane interchange that's going to be constructed on I-15 will make that connection and open up about 350 acres for development on the north side of Farmington. Maybe before we jump into the specific interchanges, I want to provide just a little bit of a context of maybe what I feel is important as it relates to specifically this State Route 193. And you all are going to see the apex of my PowerPoint skills here. So I have worked really hard to put this together. So I'm really excited. You get to be the first one to see it. Here's this State Route 193. It's unique again, West Davis corridor, I-15, Highway 89, this full east-west connection. It's a 5-lane cross section, 45 to 50 miles an hour. It is designed to move goods and services, which works out well when you've got Hill Air Force Base right here being the largest single site employer in the state, Freeport Center, et cetera. So what I really wanted to start was, gosh, if I could just make a blue dot blink and follow a route. So here we go. Let's go on a tour of 193. We start at the Eastgate Business Park, which targets aerospace and defense manufacturers. The upper right is Janicki Industry, which is located here specifically to participate on the work with the F-35 Lightning. Speaking of the F-35, there he is, launching the Falcon Hill Aerospace Research Park, a national model of a public-private partnership with the Air Force. Falcon Hill facilitated the sighting of Northrop Grumman, who won the 20-year, $63 billion contract to develop the Sentinel nuclear missile, has led to a base 2021 impact of $7.1 billion, nearly double the impact of 2019. We passed Freeport and the 7 million square feet fully leased. And here, this is why I love Google Earth, is that it's an excellent planning tool of looking where there's opportunity. 400 acres of contiguous land right there adjacent to 193. So again, there's my apex of PowerPoint skills. I was very excited. Blue blinking dot. Let me know if you need help on that. So let's
Very
dive in a little
impressive, very impressive, Kent. Well done.
bit.
Great job,
Thank-
Kent.
Thank you. So this is diving into SR 193. This right here is those 400 acres that I'm talking about. And here's where the interchange is going to land. And so is what the market study did is, again, look at where there were opportunities along the whole region. And certainly you could see some square footage go north, some square footage go south, but the consultants did their best to try to create some renderings of maybe what it would look like when it hits the ground, or if it hits the ground. Again, I can tell you, one thing I can promise you, it won't develop exactly like this, but here's another cool tool that you can do on PowerPoint. But now I'm going to transition to a slide that shows maybe what development could look like at this site. So again, one more time, got the interchange right here. Excellent job center opportunity. There you go. So this report is it's traditional zoning colors. So the red's going to be the commercial, yellow single family, blue is the office, and this purple is our industrial flex opportunity. When the consultants looked at it, they looked at an opportunity of a job center and then significant amounts of retail and residential. And as you can imagine, this runs the border between West Point and Syracuse. There's a lot of aggressiveness from both of these communities as it relates to retail. But we are in this changing economy. And so what opportunities will exist long-term will yet to be seen, but I'm bullish about this opportunity for industrial and flex. And then there's a significant residential component. You know, these communities have traditionally been fairly rural, so density has been a little bit harder of a conversation. But there was some, I believe, a lot of recognition of density in the right locations and housing choices being important to these communities, and are something that their councils are willing to look at. Some examples of the types of development that you could see there is right there. So let's move on next down to Antelope Drive. Antelope Drive is another full east-west connector connecting to 89, I-15, West Davis corridor, going all the way out to Antelope Island. Again, watch slowly, closely. And this is what the consultants are showing as an opportunity. This is certainly a little bit heavier on the regional retail. Something else they see an opportunity here is either a hotel or maybe an art center, something that provide complements to what occurs out on Antelope Island. And then some examples of some renderings of development types that occur in this area. Next location is Layton and 2700 West. This is the Layton Parkway, Gentile Street, Hillfield Road. So it's going to provide a lot of nice connection to a lot of different centers. But here's another large amounts of property that you see available. Layton particularly has been very aggressive on preserving this land for a business park in the future. And they believe certainly some flex will be in there, but a strong office component. Something that kind of unique, I had never even really heard of this term, was a vertiport. The idea of being able to move larger goods and services via drones. This area would be a direct line from the Salt Lake International Airport to this location without flying over residents. And so something that Layton has expressed some interest in, and certainly when you look at this changing economy, that's another unique opportunity that we'll see in the future. Now this is North Farmington Station. So right now, this is where the Shepherd Lane interchange is going to go on I-15. It will follow a road over here over to the West Davis corridor. This, what I'm about to share with you, was separate from our West Davis corridor interchange study. But again, Farmington's led out very heavily, obviously adopting now the first station area plan. So there's their front runner station. There's their Center Cows Station Park development, their little fountain. This is where you've got about 350 acres of opportunity. And there you go. So this is the existing commercial that exists, but they are also very heavy on office. And so much so that Stack Development, that's done a lot of the work in Lehigh, has purchased this property, sections of this property, and has submitted a site plan for a 6-story, 180,000 square foot office space. Something else that I think is unique with this is how aggressive Farmington has been as it relates to density. We will see as much population estimate in this area as all the other interchanges on the West Davis corridor. Farmington has gone really aggressive and feel like this is the right location for density and even some real deed restricted affordable housing opportunities. So when you look at all, what does it all mean? When you combine all the square footage, again, market study, we could all beat it up a little bit. Over a 20-year construction absorption, you'd be looking at a taxable value of $3.6 billion. 30,000 residents now have an opportunity to live along these interchanges, and 23,500 jobs. That's really what we see when I look at economic diversity. This is the type of diversity that we need to be very aggressive about in Davis County, and how we develop over the next 10 to 15 years will shape who we are for the next 100. So we need to do this appropriately. And thanks to partnerships with groups like Wasatch Front, our partners at UDOT, our city partners, we believe we're going to have a really great opportunity to shape this to be the place we want to be. That's it. Super quick, but again, thanks Wasatch Front for partnering and helping us put this together.
Thanks, Kent. That's a great presentation. Again, I'm sure there's people would like to share this. Rosie can make sure that happens. So appreciate it. Perfect information. Any
Before,
questions?
may I jump in with
Yeah.
a comment? Oh, sure.
Go ahead. Yeah, help yourself.
Thank you. I'm Meg Townsend, Wasatch Front Regional Council. Kent, I've never seen a blue dot blink so smoothly. That was great. Thank you for your presentation. I want to make a couple of quick points here. First, what you're saying, what you've said here ties together something Phil talked about so well, with 122, was it 122,000 under 19 in Davis County?
Yes.
And 23,000 jobs in the next 20 years. I mean, that just really, for me, puts a fine point on the housing affordability problem that we're having, right? That 30% of those who can't afford a home are a lot of those who might fill those 23,000 jobs. And then second, if a project like this has is setting off any light bulbs in your head for your community, please reach out. We have technical assistance to support market studies and efforts like it through the Transportation and Land Use Connection Program, among other things. So if something like this seems like something your city should be engaging in, reach out, let us know. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. Any additional questions for Kent before we move on?
I have a quick question for Kent and the team. I'm
Go ahead.
wondering how the transition from office space post-pandemic is affecting your plan moving forward. I see quite a bit of office space, but I know that at other cities, they're trying to get rid of some of their office space and turn it into elsewhere because people are now using the hybrid or not using that office space. We're seeing it used differently. I'm wondering how that is incorporated into your plan moving forward.
Yeah, so that's a great question because I've been asking the same thing over the last couple of years. Is this demand going to continue to exist the way that it has? I think this is likely a little more evident of a decentralization from urban cores. We have traditionally lacked any Class A office opportunities in northern Utah of any significance. Those that do exist are leased. And so there's a need for immediate office now. Will it ever reach 3 million? I mean, I think that's aggressive, certainly, but these are some of the conversations that we need to continue to stay in contact with our developers. I think you could maybe see smaller square footage developments, but this idea of being proximity to residential and opportunities transit, our market is much larger, and the opportunity to place residents in close proximity to their workplace is going to hopefully drive some of those. And then certainly Northrop Grumman and what's going on at Hill Air Force Base is a bit of an anomaly, probably in a lot of the Western US. And you look at, I mean, this is really a generational project. This is going to change the community, but we want to make sure that we've got the product type to facilitate what they're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great question. Anyone else before we move on? Again, Kent, thanks. Great presentation. And boy, you might have to go into education teaching that blue dot move. That was pretty impressive. So great job. Let's now go to our next agenda item, which is we're going to hear from Laura Hanson with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. She's going to take a few minutes to really update us on the statewide plan for economic growth. Fits right in with what that's a statewide growth to 2030. That fits right in with both of our presentations we've heard today. So Laura, appreciate you being with us. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm going to see if I can successfully share my screen here. Okay, so I am here to give you an update on Utah's Coordinated Action Plan for Economic Vision 2030, which I recognize is quite the mouthful. but let me tell you why it's called that. So we are working on a great effort in partnership with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, all of the AOGs around the state, and we have a consulting firm on board assisting us with that called Camoin Associates. And we've been working through, we received a grant, and I think some of you have heard some of this, so I apologize for the repeat, but we received a grant from the Economic Development Administration for statewide economic development planning. And we have given out most of those resources of the $1 million grant in $100,000 sub-awards to each of the AOGs to do a variety of things. But the remaining funds we retain to develop essentially sort of this unified plan. And so the overarching kind of structure for this is a document called Utah's Economic Vision 2030. And this is a document that was produced by the Economic Opportunity Commission in September of 2021. And this document outlines essentially sort of the state's high-level priorities for economic development and opportunity. And you can see the list of strategies listed there: education and talent pipeline, planning and community growth alignment, economic opportunity for all, a startup state, and a variety of other things. So we have this kind of statewide strategy, and then within each of the different regions, each economic development district produces a document called a CEDS, or a comprehensive economic development strategy. And you'll hear a little bit more about the Wasatch Front's plan for that in just a few minutes from Marcia. But basically, we've got the state level exercise and we've got this rural or regional level, but there's nothing kind of in between or linking the regions to one another. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with this effort, is really both come from the top down, but also the bottom up and across regions to come up with some shared goals. So this is our effort. We are working with every single one of the state's AOGs and trying to develop basically a coordinated action plan. The idea here is that there may be issues or strategies that the Wasatch Front Regional Council area is working on that maybe it shares with MAG, or maybe that it shares with Bear River. And there may be opportunities for us to leverage our efforts and our resources across regions, and also tie what is happening at the regional level back up with what's happening at the state and vice versa. So we have a handful of mutual goals. You know, we want to make sure that each regional CEDS document is successful and that we're supporting it. You know, we're trying to demonstrate some leadership across the state. I mentioned helping the regions leverage resources more effectively. And ultimately, our goal is really to improve quality of life for Utahns and make sure that we have greater economic opportunity for all. So our project timeline We started back in April of 2022. We are just nearing the end of this planning process. We've got a lot of the kind of final work to do to pull everything together, and I'll share some of those resources with you today. But our goal is to really finish everything up in the beginning of the new year. So the work that's happened so far has really been focused around sort of research and analysis of what is happening within the state and what's happening within each of the state's regions. And I think these slides will be shared with you all after this meeting, so you're able to dig into these in more detail on your own. But I have some hyperlinks built in here of a number of different work products that have been produced as part of this process that you might find really interesting. The first is what we call the 6I analysis, and I stands for infrastructure, innovation, international. There's a interest. There's a number of keywords that all start with the letter I that our consultants, this is kind of a format they use to help evaluate the economic prosperity of a region. So we did a statewide analysis comparing how Utah sits as compared to other states in the nation, but then also drilling down to each of the regions within the state of Utah and how you all compare to other regions within the state. So that 6I analysis, you can dig into the details there, and I think some of that has been presented to this group already at a previous meeting. The next piece there is an industry and workforce analysis, and this is a newer work product. I'm just going to click on the link here to show you what's here really quickly. This is essentially sort of a profile of the state and of the regions in just sort of economic and demographic highlights, average earnings, educational attainment, job growth, unemployment, GDP. And you can see the Wasatch Front region as compared to the state here, a high level of educational attainment, average earnings, really low unemployment, really the source of the state's general GDP or gross regional exports, it looks like GRP. And population. So that's a resource that's available. You can also look at all of the other regions of the state in this document here. And then some of you may recall that we had a survey that we sent out to a number of business owners around the state. We worked closely with the chambers, but also the EDDs throughout the state. And we have an analysis of all of the survey data that we received here. Again, a lot more detail than I can go into in this short period of time, but there's lots of information for you to be able to look at here. Just a quick table of contents. You can look at the characteristics of which types of businesses responded, workforce trends, operational trends, challenges that businesses are facing, some information about the business environment in which they work in, and then how they interact with state and local government. And then it breaks that down by the regions themselves. And so there's a lot of great charts and data in here. There is one slide that I just wanted to point out to you all that was a little confusing to me. And so I want to explain it before you dig into it here. So in the regional breakdown here, you'll see Wasatch Front, the Wasatch Front region listed on this chart here. And this slide here, so this is page 32, looks almost exactly like page 33, except for the information is different. And the difference here is there were 26 respondents to the survey that indicated that they worked in multiple different regions. They are included in the first slide, they're excluded in the second slide. So just if you're getting confused as you're looking through that, but you can see here, again, this is not statistically valid. It's just based on the people who chose to respond to our survey. So sort of self-selected, but there's a lot of great information in here that you can dig into. So the next steps that we have, we are currently working on an assessment of organizational structures for economic development. And so our consulting team looked at how economic development is handled within the state of Utah as compared to other states around the nation. And this little graphic on the right is an example of some of their findings there. So they really found that states have kind of three different levels of coordination. Utah falls into the low coordination strategy right now, or area right now, whereas states like Texas and New York have much higher participation. I think Ohio is another really high participation area. And so what they're evaluating here is how closely are regional EDDs working with the state Office of Economic Development, for example. Are there separate independent economic development nonprofit advocacy organizations that are helping? How do those different groups work with one another? Every state does it differently. There's no right or wrong way, but we are exploring, is the way that Utah is doing it the right way? Are there things for us to gain from exploring some different strategies, different ways of working with one another? Are there ways that we can increase collaboration and coordination between the state and the regions, and between the regions and themselves, other regions? And there may be some opportunities for us there. So we're talking through that, and we'll have some more information to share with you all when we come back to meet with you in person in January. And with each of the other regions, and then we'll walk through the details of this industry and workforce analysis and the business survey analysis. And then the last step really in this kind of research phase is talking, really assessing the targeted infrastructure priority lists, regional priorities, and how those compare to state priorities. The needs along the Wasatch Front are quite different than the needs in, the southeastern part of the state, for example. And so how can we tailor our economic development strategies to meet the needs of each of the unique regions within the state? So that is coming up in the next little bit. And then once we compile all of that research and analysis, we have two remaining steps. The next is really to develop a strategy. Like, how are we going to go out and move all of these things forward? How do we communicate that? And then what sort of dashboard do we have so that each of the regions in the state are collecting data in a similar format so that we can share it, roll it up into kind of a shared data dashboard that we can all learn from and utilize in kind of new ways. And then we'll put together the final plan itself. The final plan will include all of those bits and pieces that I shared with you earlier. So it'll have some sort of statewide economic profile, a profile of each AOG region. We'll have some sort of summary, and then the real meat of the document will be an action plan matrix. And I've got just kind of a very rough example on the side of the graph of the slide here of what that might include. We would have a goal that comes from that statewide economic vision document. We'd say, okay, here's the specific action that we are going to take within the Wasatch Front, or within the Bear River area, or within the 5-county area. Here's what we're going to do to move this forward. Who's the champion? Who will be responsible for actually making it happen? What resources are needed, or what resources do we have to put towards this? A timeline, and then perhaps some sort of performance or success benchmark or metric. And then we'll have a data appendix that it compiles all of that information together into one big thing. So that's where we're headed. I mentioned that we'll be coming back to present to you all in person in early January. So be looking out for that meeting. I think that'll be the next meeting of this group. And if I have just one more minute, I just want to give a quick plug for another planning effort that we are working on, which is called Guiding Our Growth. We had a lot of conversation earlier in our meeting here today about some of the pressures and challenges that we are struggling with as Utahns, as our state continues to grow. And we are working very closely with Wasatch Front Regional Council, among many other partners, on an effort that we are calling Guiding Our Growth. And we have a website. The URL is here on the screen, and I'll drop it into the chat as well. Right now, it's basically just a landing page, but there is a survey on there. We would love for you all to answer the survey, and also to share it with your constituencies and your networks. The more people who respond to this, the better the input we'll get, and the more responsive the next phases of the planning process will be to the public's input. So thank you so much. That's all I've got, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Laura. Any questions for Laura before we move on? Appreciate that presentation. We'll also share that presentation, so you'll have that available to reread at your leisure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Great seeing you. Let's move now to our next agenda item, which is an update on the 5-year SIDS update. The consultants have some time and also the timeline on what they're going to present to us. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Vice Chair Nguyen to make the presentation of the consultant.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, and it was a great opportunity to serve on the selection committee, and we had a fine group of people. We spent much time reviewing several proposals and going through all of those, and we have determined and accepted a proposal from Better City to be the consultant that will lead us through this next 5-year SEDS study. And today we do have part of the Zoom meeting. Jason Godfrey is here from Better City, and I would like to give him the opportunity to say a few words and maybe introduce his team to us. So Jason, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Nguyen. And it's truly an honor for us to be able to participate in this SEDS process with the county and or the different counties and cities and the Wasatch Front Regional Council. First I'll introduce the team, part of them who are on the call today. We have Eric Gibson. He lives up in the Logan area. Ryan England is on. He's actually you can see the Wasatch Front Regional Council offices from his bedroom window. So he's literally right across the street from y'all. And then Monet Roberts, who is out of Cleveland, the Cleveland, Ohio area. Just a couple of words. Don't want to take up too much time right now, but we're a firm with Northern Utah roots, but national scope, and we work with communities throughout the country. What you saw today is exceptional, and I talked about this when we interviewed with the research committee. Utah exceptionalism is a real thing. And just as when the pioneers came and established the Salt Lake Valley and established the different communities and colonized the West, that was the model for community development, from then on. Some of the things that Utah is working on right now, and some of the forward-looking ideas that are out there, and the things you're looking at, will be the model for other communities. And we're just really pleased to be part of this. What Kent was working on is working on, just great stuff. And one of the primary purposes that we see in this plan is to figure out, you've got the state that's doing their statewide planning. You've got Davis County is doing great stuff, and Twilla and Morgan. Everybody's got their own groups that are doing planning. So what is the role of this group? There's such a wealth of talent here on this call, right? There's such an amazing treasure of experience and passion and interest. And so how to leverage this organization where it fits within the realm of economic development within the state to make sure that it's adding value. We think there's a really significant role to be played there, but that's going to be part of our process. It's just carving that out, making sure this group is able to leverage its really unique skills to make a difference. So we look forward to interviewing all of you if possible. We'll be contacting all of you and really get into the communities and understanding what it is that's going to make a difference. Marcia, anything you want to add, or anything else do we need to cover?
Yeah, just real quick. Just so you know, we're going to start this process as soon as we can get the contract signed, and then it will go all the way through August. So they've planned some on-site visits. They've planned some one-on-ones, some focus groups, and so yeah, we look forward to starting this process. So thank you, and thanks to the selection committee. There were a lot of responses from all over the world. I mean, what nation? Sorry, world.
World.
We are the world.
Good.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jason. Does that conclude your remarks?
Yes, thank you so much. And we look forward to our working together continually with Jason. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mayor. Good to see you. Okay, before we move on, other business, you'll see attached to the agenda is our next year's 2023 meeting schedule. You see that there'll be ad hoc meetings for the 5-year SIDS, as Jason just said. Marcia, I'm assuming that we'll give some notification on those ad hoc meetings. Will you send that out, or Mayor Nguyen, so we can coordinate that? Thank you.
We won't know until we get into the schedule a little bit more, but
Right.
we definitely will give some time before. We'll give you a heads up. How's that?
That'd be great. So we'll anticipate that at sometime after the first year, obviously. So great. Okay, any other, Marcia, Andrew, Mayor Wynn, any additional comments you'd like to make before we close this meeting out?
Yeah, just really quick, Chair. January 20th from 9 to 11, we'll be holding that. I call it the statewide SEDS. It's, you know, that really long name that the state is doing there, but the consultants will be back. So we'll have a kind of a hybrid meeting there. And so we'll get that out to everybody on their calendars as well.
Great. And we're planning on that for January 2023, 9 to 11. Is that correct? So mark that down on your calendars. We'd like to have you there. That's 9 to 11 on that date. And then we can make sure we hear the results, see the results of that statewide study. With that, if there's no other business, we're going to head and adjourn. I wish everybody on this committee a happy holidays. Have a great season out there. Be careful and let's keep this snow coming. Have a great Christmas and New Year's. See you after the first year, folks. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.